Welcome into Floyd Street's Finest. I am Jack Grossman, joined by, for lack of a better term, a round table of people today, including all-time Kentucky leading scorer Dan Issel, James Streble, the Round Daddy himself, host of the Round Table on ESPN 683 to 6 p.m. weekdays, and Cam Drummond from the Lexington Herald-Leader covering Kentucky basketball. It's rivalry week. It's Louisville, Kentucky. And we got a full house here talking cards and cats, getting ready to take the floor. By the time this publishes, probably later this afternoon today on Saturday. Guys, thanks so much for coming on. Really, really appreciate it. Again, Floyd Street's Finest, part of the Field 68 Podcast Network. Like, subscribe, do all that nonsense I usually forget to say on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, however you're consuming this. You can find me on Twitter at JackRosen97. Dan is at Dan Issel44. Cam is at C Drummond97, and Streble is at J Streble82. Dan, do you actually run your Twitter? Who does that on your end? Are you the guy firing tweets off?
No. I'm an old guy, Jack. I don't know how to do any of that stuff. So no. The little time that I'm on it, somebody else does it. I ask them to put it out there, but it's not me putting it out there. I have no clue.
So this leads me to this. So when you tweeted that Kentucky is a basketball school a couple of years ago,
yeah. Yeah, and I think I thank Coach Stoops for proving that game after game this year. Thank you, Coach Stoops.
As usual, Dan's right. As usual.
Oh, we're gonna have a ball here today on this one. We're talking cards and cats mainly, though. We'll see where else we wander. There could be a lot of different ways this could go tonight. But Dan, let's start with you here because I have the podcast every once in a while. Streble obviously has the show. Cam writes for the Herald-Leader and does, radio spots, all that stuff. I'm sure people on both sides of the rivalry want to hear what your thoughts are on both of these teams so far. What have you seen? We'll start with Kentucky because you probably watched them closer. But what are your thoughts on both UK and U of L going into this game?
Well, I think collectively, Jack, it's kind of unbelievable to me that both Mark Pope and Coach Kelsey have been able to put together a team basically on the fly. I mean, they had no players to start with. Of course, Louisville didn't have any players last year either. So that was an easy choice there. But I've been surprised how well both of these teams. Now, Louisville's had all kinds of injuries, and that certainly has hurt their season so far. But I mean, they're 6-4. They have some nice wins. Kentucky being 9-1, I don't think anybody could have ever imagined that. And of course, being a Kentucky alum, I love that they're playing so well. But you know what I almost love as much is Coach Pope. I mean, he has very quickly put a culture in place that we need at the University of Kentucky. I mean, he was part of it. He's been there. He's played it. He's won championships. And so the fact that it's just a little small thing, like he refuses to wear sweatshirts in Rupp Arena.
Yeah.
He wears a coat and tie in Rupp Arena. I love that. And I don't know that tomorrow's game is going to be that close, but I do think that both of these programs are on the right track for sure.
First of all, Dan, I don't know if you knew that Cam was the one that asked the question about the suit.
I asked the question, because obviously that had been, I think, after the Duke game in Atlanta where Pope and the assistants were wearing sweatsuits. So I just asked him, hey, it's suits at home, it's sweatsuits on the road, kind of what gives here. And he basically confirmed that. And he also said that, just it feels, like Rupp Arena is a sacred place to him, right? This is a place where he's made so many memories, continues to do that for the rest of the Kentucky fan base. He just wouldn't feel proper not wearing a suit, coaching a game, being on the bench at Rupp. And I'll do that anecdote one better. Today I was at Memorial Coliseum for the pregame press conference featuring Mark Pope ahead of the Louisville game on Saturday. And some of the Kentucky sports information staff were getting everything ready, all the sponsor stuff. And they got out a Diet Coke to put in front, for sponsorship reasons. And we were kind of joking with them, like, you're not going to put out the Coca-Cola can, the red can. And they said Mark Pope will not tolerate anything red on that podium. And especially not during Louisville week, right ahead of the game.
Well, that's the Louisville, Kentucky for you.
I get it. Red or orange. We don't want either color.
No.
Streble, you were a guy that was a doubter very initially on Mark Pope. How is he, obviously, beating Gonzaga and Duke in a month will do that, but how has he been able to win over guys like you and really the rest of Kentucky fans in a very similar way that Louisville fans were won over by Pat Kelsey really quickly as well?
Yeah, I was very much in the wait and see mode when it came with Mark Pope once he was hired, because he was fine at BYU. He did a very good job, beat Kansas and Fog Allen, was like a 5 or 6 seed in the NCAA tournament, lost for the first game. So Kentucky has a standard, and the standard is championships. The standard is the best of the best when it comes to players. The standard is winning games like neutral court against Duke, neutral court against Gonzaga. So I had to see what Mark Pope had to do, what he did, how he built his program. And I was impressed, first off, with the way that he embraced being Kentucky's coach. And, Dan referred to him wearing a coat and tie in Rupp Arena. He gets it more than anybody because that's where he played. That's where he won a championship. He came up under, as Dan calls him, Slick Rick. Slick Rick brought him back to Rupp Arena. And then the next step for me was assembling a team on the fly. And look, he assembled a team with some very good players that fit his system. Andrew Carr comes from an ACC school at Wake Forest. Otega Owe comes from the Big 12 with Oklahoma. So, so did Jackson Robinson, Big 12 with BYU. Lamont Butler had played in a national championship game with San Diego State. So that was another check mark for me. Then the recruits started coming in. That was a question I had was, John Calipari was able to get 5 stars, 4 stars. And I know they don't always translate, but it's the image, it's the aura of Kentucky that matters as well as winning on the basketball court. So he gets Malachi Moreno, Jasper Johnson, Caden Lewis, and pretty soon Caleb Wilson. So he has hit every single note. Oh yeah. And the winning doesn't hurt either. 9-1, as Dan said, and I didn't expect that. I thought, they might drop the Duke game just because that was a major scene, and I didn't know if the guys would be ready for that yet. They passed that test. Clemson, you could, forgive that loss, first true road game. That Clemson team's a top 25 team, fresh off of an Elite Eight, and the Gonzaga game just kind of sealed it for me that he had the coaching acumen to overcome these deficits and to make adjustments and throw a zone out there when he needs to throw a zone out there, to figure out ways to score the basketball other than just sitting back and chucking up threes. He'll do that, but he has other ways. And then the last thing that I'll say is the way he handled Jackson Robinson at the point. And I'm not giving Pope all the credit. That young man played a hell of a game at Gonzaga, but being down Kirk Kriisa, being down Lamont Butler, and being able to adjust the team to the way Jackson Robinson plays, it was just a masterstroke, and I couldn't be more pleased with Mark Pope as the head coach of the University of Kentucky.
I mean, you brought it up there with the injuries, how well it's gone even despite them. Jackson Robinson stepped up, filling that role. Mark Pope talking about in the presser earlier on Friday about how maybe Otega Owe, Chandler get some more time at the point as well. Cam, you were there in Lexington with the presser talking to Mark Pope. Does it sound like we're not asking you to report anything here, but does it sound like Lamont Butler is going to play against Louisville?
I was gonna say at this point, I would probably lean 40-60, 40% yes, he plays, 60% no, he plays. I guess 60-40 would have made more sense if I phrased it that way. But, I'm leaning towards Lamont Butler not playing for Kentucky on Saturday. I actually asked Mark Pope the question, what's the injury status on Lamont Butler? And it doesn't sound like a lot has changed in the later part of this week compared to the early part of this week. The update on Lamont Butler prior to the Colgate game was that he'd done some light workout, some running, some individual work, but no team activities. The update on Friday afternoon before Kentucky practiced on Friday was that Lamont Butler had done some light workouts, had done some individual work, but still no team activities. And while Mark Pope consistently this week, both in press conferences, pregame, postgame, on his Monday night radio show, expressed a desire for Lamont Butler to be back as soon as possible for Kentucky, whether that was Colgate on Wednesday night or whether that's Louisville on Saturday evening. But nonetheless, Mark Pope still seemed to have some reservations in terms of, his availability. He said he'd like to have him out there, obviously, but he's just not sure if he's going to be there. Obviously, Kentucky has a complete week off between the Louisville game and the CBS Sports Classic on the 21st against Ohio State in Madison Square Garden. So if he doesn't go against Louisville on Saturday, you would expect and hope that injury heals up in time for that. And to what Streble was saying and what you were alluding to a second ago, one of the good things, at least, dealing with two point guard injuries right now, Kirk Kriisa, obviously more of a long-term thing than Lamont Butler, is just the fact that Mark Pope's system, and perhaps more importantly, the players that he has on this Kentucky roster, can fill in when something like this happens. You have the versatility for guys like Otega Oweh or Jackson Robinson, nailed-in starters to slide over to play some of the one. Colin Chandler, even though he's still a freshman and still doing that ramp-up process after taking 2 years off for his mission trip, he can come in and give you somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes when those guys need a spell on the bench. Travis Perry didn't fare great, honestly, against Colgate on Wednesday night. I would be a little bit surprised if we see a lot of extended run for him in meaningful minutes and in meaningful games, at least in the immediate future. But nonetheless, Kentucky has shown an ability, and Mark Pope has shown an ability, kind of piecemeals things together at that one guard spot. And I would expect that to probably be the case again on Saturday night, assuming Butler can't go. But nonetheless, Kentucky is a talented team, echoing what Issel and Streble have both said. Tremendous start to the season. Mark Pope is literally doing everything correctly in terms of winning over the fan base, right down to buying them ice cream for sticking around for his post radio shows. So, the vibe around the program, the vibe in media sessions, the vibe in Rupp Arena when the starting lineup and the coaches announced, it could not be more of a contrast to what some of the John Calipari later years were here in Lexington.
Let me ask you guys this, because I have my thoughts on how that impacts it from a Louisville side, but from a Kentucky point of view, how different is game planning Louisville and preparing for them on both ends of the floor, offensively and defensively, without Lamont Butler?
I think Chucky Hepburn becomes a major problem without Lamont Butler because he is going to get after it defensively. We know what he does in terms of steals, in terms of ball pressure, and it would make me feel a lot better if a battle-tested point guard that's very similar to Chucky Hepburn was out there to kind of equalize him. Butler may not be the scorer that Chucky Hepburn is, but he for sure is the type of defender that Lamont Butler is. So it does give me some pause and some worry just because of Chucky Hepburn. I do think that Jackson Robinson with a combination of Otega Oweh, Colin Chandler will fare just fine. But it does give me pause because I do worry about how careless they can be with the ball, not because they're not paying attention to the game, because they're just not used to playing that position, especially with a pesky, intense defensive guard the way Chucky Hepburn is.
I have no idea what kind of injury Butler has, but
it's a right ankle injury, Dan.
Yeah, but come on. This is Louisville. If he goes on the naughty list, if he doesn't play against Louisville, I don't know anything, but Cam, I'm going to turn your 60-40 around. I bet it's 60% he plays against Louisville, and James is right. But the thing I keep going back to for this game is, how shorthanded they are. The great thing about Kentucky is they're not dependent on one guy or two guys or three guys. Somebody different, I guess, always been the most consistent. I think he's been in double figures every game, but there are two or three guys that always step up. And if they get into a match, a racehorse match tomorrow, I don't think Louisville can hang with Kentucky.
Well, Cam made a great point on my show yesterday. He said Kentucky comes at you in waves. And, whenever another team has a lead or whatever, and that combination that Pope has out there isn't working, he can send 3-4 more fresh bodies into the game. And I expect that's what he does against Louisville as well. With the absence of Butler, he's going to try different combinations, different matchups, and keep throwing different looks and isolating and trying out different players. I expect guys like Andrew Carr and Amari Williams to have big games because they're so thin in the paint. Andrew Carr is uber talented on the block and in the perimeter. I expect that matchup, which I assume would be Noah Waterman, to definitely go Andrew Carr's way. And then with Amari Williams, he's such a veteran. He's so skilled. He's very smart, has great court vision. James Scott, fine player, hustles. I think Amari Williams will get one over on him. And then if Amari Williams is on the bench, all of a sudden, here's Brandon Garrison. He comes out here. He's shown some highlights this season too. He's got room to grow for sure, but we've seen flashes. Especially you single out that Duke game where he had 6 points in a row. He's shown the ability to play well under pressure, and this is going to be a pressure-packed game. Make no mistake about it. You can throw analytics and records and everything out. Like Dan said, this is Kentucky and Louisville, and I'm excited for the game. I think it's going to be a close affair for a while, but again, back to Cam's point, the wave keeps coming when it comes with Mark Pope and the Wildcats.
I think that's a huge key with what both of you guys are talking about there, because I almost compared it. You looked at Louisville and Duke, where Louisville came out, they played with such great energy, such great intensity early in the game. But the question is, especially with those 7 guys, can you sustain that for 40 minutes? And against Duke, they couldn't. And while UK isn't nearly as athletic as Duke, and they're not going to be able to athletically wear you out like Duke did, the fact that they're so deep, the fact that they move so much without the ball and make you play and really defend really hard on the defensive end, I think could be a thing that wears Louisville down throughout the game, to where Louisville's almost like, to use another horse racing analogy, for Louisville to win the game, they gotta show that early speed. They gotta get out early and just gotta hang on for dear life late. That's kind of what we saw in the Duke game, to where they had those early turnovers, and what could have been when they were 8 of 11 from 3, they could have been up 18-20. Instead, they're only up 9. You're thinking, okay, they're playing about as well as they can play. There's going to be negative regression on the 3-point shooting, and they're going to get tired. You're still not feeling too great about this. So if Louisville, I feel like Louisville's only shot is to come out with a really big opening punch and hope that's enough to sustain it. But we've seen from Kentucky, 1, they come in waves, 2, Pope makes adjustments, and 3, they're never truly out of a game. So I think it's an uphill battle for Louisville. That being said, Lamont Butler doesn't play. That's, as you said, Streble really, really opens things up for Chucky Hepburn a lot more, to where he can be much more of a pest, trying to take Jackson Robinson out of the game, or take away whoever's playing the point guard. The great thing about Kentucky, they're fully healthy. Chucky Hepburn can only guard one dude. And if he's guarding Lamont Butler, then you could say, well, Jackson Robinson, you take the ball up the floor. And you don't completely neutralize Chucky, so you can still do things off the ball, but that takes away that pickup point, the on-ball pressure, the things he does best. And I think the big key is, can Kentucky, which they've done at a lot of points so far this year, that Duke game especially, they're going to use Andrew Carr and Amari Williams as those pressure releases and getting them the ball on the elbow, on the high post. And I think it'll be more Terrence Edwards, Javon Hadley on Carr than Noah Waterman, but James Scott on Amari Williams, can he stay out of foul trouble like he's done the last couple games where he's played 26 and 29 minutes? He's still got 4 fouls in both games, but if you can get in the upper 20s in minutes before you get those 4 fouls for James Scott, that's really huge for Louisville, because he's their only guy that's theoretically a shot blocking presence, and he's really their only size. He's a good lob threat. He's good in dribble handoff and zoom action as well, to where if you're Louisville, can you contain those guys and make Chucky Hepburn be able to be the pest that he can be and try to create some turnover? Kentucky doesn't turn the ball over a lot either, which favors them, because Louisville hasn't generated turnovers against teams that take care of the ball well so far.
Well, go ahead, Cam.
Put a perfect bow on this. I actually asked Pope earlier today about the idea of coming at opponents in waves. And this has been a season-long thing for Kentucky, right? Like, this isn't just localized to the Louisville game. The whole structure of their team, going all the way back to August and September, when we were talking about, hey, this team doesn't really have a dude in quotation marks. Will that matter? Will that prove to be a hindrance in some of these marquee games, especially the Louisvilles, the Dukes, the Gonzagas of the world? So far, it hasn't been, right? Largely it hasn't been. And again, Pope didn't quite really bite on what I was trying to ask him, honestly. He kind of stuck to the script, said that every single game Kentucky plays, it's their aim to wear teams out, via attrition, to come at teams with the fact that they have 9, 10, 11 competent scholarship players that can go out there, play minutes, provide energy, all that stuff. Obviously, just given Louisville's roster situation, given the bodies they're down, the quality of the bodies that they're down to, Kashawn Pryor being out for the season, obviously being the headline there. This feels like a game where Kentucky can really take advantage of that. And just echoing everything that you guys have said, I mean, we've had Otega Owe, Jackson Robinson being leading scorers this year, Andrew Carr, Kobe Brea was the leading scorer against Colgate, and in a flash, he can knock down 2, 3, 4 3-pointers in a row, not only flipping the scoreboard, but flipping momentum. And to your point, Jack, one of the interesting early season developments for Kentucky has been kind of on the negative side. They've had some slow starts. They've had some poor first halves. They've had moments where they've gone into the locker room looking out of answers and out of sorts. But more often than not, they've come out of the locker room and they've responded. You look at that Duke game, you look at that Gonzaga game, to a lesser extent, the Colgate game, just because that was a 2-point game at the half. Even the Clemson game, while not a lot went right for Kentucky that night, you saw Pope throwing out there some different things, lineups, offensive, defensive adjustments. And Jack, as you started to segue a bit into the Louisville side of things, one of the things that if Lamont Butler isn't able to go for Kentucky, that I think the Wildcats really need to be aware of is just the penetration and the 2-point shooting, the stuff inside the arc for Louisville, because a lot's been made from beyond the 3-point line this season for both teams. Louisville can't hit a three. They also can't stop opponents from hitting threes.
Yeah.
Kentucky, the last 5 games, has gone through a pretty significant regression. I think they're shooting 27, 28% from 3 over that time period. And they're also not quite getting the volume of 3-pointers that Mark Pope and his coaching staff, Cody Feger, the offensive analyst, talked about preseason. They talked about 35 threes a game. They haven't even really cracked 30 threes a game most nights. But that being said, Louisville is a top 15 team in the country in terms of 2-point field goal percentage. And Kentucky should have a decided advantage on the inside just from a size perspective. And you're relying on experience too with Andrew Carr and Amari Williams. So I think that matchup, just what Louisville does inside the 3-point arc, becomes a lot more fascinating and a bit more of a toss-up, honestly, if you don't have Butler as that head of the snake perimeter defender for Kentucky on the floor.
All right, let's do this because I have screwed up and used the wrong Zoom account to where the Zoom meeting's going to end in less than a minute. So we're going to take a quick break. If you guys just hang on there for a sec, I'll create a new Zoom link. Shocking, this isn't actually live, and I will send it to you guys real quick here. You're listening to Floyd Street's Finest. We'll be back right after this.
The best month of the year is here, which is why you need to know that we are partnered with BetMGM. We'll be using BetMGM lines for making all of our picks and predictions, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers of the Field of 68. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, you can use bonus code FIELD, and you will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's the best part. All you need to do is deposit and bet $10 of your hard-earned money to get it. This is what you have to do to make it work. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using that bonus code FIELD. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. You'll get up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your bet loses. Just make sure you use that bonus code FIELD when you sign up. Most importantly, we have some fun stuff coming up for the rest of the NCAA tournament. Bet insurance tokens, college hoops odds boost, and the thing that I love the most, a nice little parlay boost, as well as a ridiculous array of prop bets for anything that you could possibly imagine betting on. From odds on getting to the Final Four to national championship futures, I'm calling it right now. BetMGM is the king of the prop bet. So go download the BetMGM app. Use that code FIELD and sign up today. And while I've got you, a quick request. The best way to support the Field of 68 content you get for free is to engage with us. Rate and review the pod in any podcast app. Like and share the YouTube videos that you enjoy. Tell your friends about us. It all helps in a world where the algorithm is king. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Floyd Street's Finest, part of the Field of 68 podcast network. He is all-time Kentucky leading scorer, NBA Hall of Famer Dan Issel, Lexington Herald-Leader Kentucky basketball reporter Cam Drummond, the host of the Roundtable with Round Daddy, James Streble, ESPN 680, 105.7, 3 to 6 p.m. weekdays, And I am merely Jack Grossman. But we are still rolling here on the podcast. Apologies for that. First time I've done that since I've taken over hosting duties, where I just did it on the wrong account there. Didn't have the actual paid account there. So my fault. But when we came back before we start recording again, Dan Issel has said he wants to go first. And when Dan Issel says he wants to talk, you shut up and let him talk. So Dan, just take it away.
Jack, the most revealing part of this podcast so far has been that Pope actually takes questions from Drummond.
Cal took questions from me too. He wasn't always happy about him, but he did take the questions. Sometimes I'll say. I
just want to talk about something that Cam said earlier about the 2-pointers and the 3-pointers. I think, Jack, you were right. One of the big keys to this game is going to be if Louisville can prove to Kentucky early that they can stay with them. Not only to prove that to Kentucky, but maybe to prove it to themselves. But as far as the 3-point shooting is going, Louisville has been atrocious. They're like 300. I think I read today 341st in
that is exactly what they are.
300 in 3-point field goal accuracy. I think they shot 18% against UTEP. Is that who they played in the last game?
Yes.
Yeah, 18%. If they can't shoot, I'm going to say 30% from the 3-point line against Kentucky, they've got no shot.
And I'll say this, that's been the big story with Louisville is I got it pulled up right here, actually. Just they brought in so many dudes that were known as really good shooters at other schools, and it just hasn't translated for whatever reason this year for U of L. Like, Rain Smith has dropped from 39.4% to 37%. That's not too much different. But Javon Hadley was a 41% 3-point shooter last season. He's shooting 25% this year. Chucky Hepburn is the one dude that's actually gone up. He's at 32 to 34. But then Noah Waterman, 37% last year, a 45% 3-point shooter the year before, 22% from 3. Terrence Edwards Jr. was at 35% last year, 26% this year. Ooh. Those 3 guys especially, but Waterman, Edwards, and Hadley, not being able to shoot threes and still shooting a high volume. The question is, will that positive regression ever happen? Or is this just who they are? And early in the season, you'd start to say they're eventually going to start hitting shots, but we're sitting here on December 13th, December 14th, they're still not hitting them yet. How long do you let that go before that becomes this is who they are now versus looking at what they did in previous years?
Jack, I'm old school. I don't like this. As much as I love Mark Pope, I don't like this saying we're going to shoot 35 3-pointers at a game. If the opportunity presents itself, that's great. But don't say we're going to shoot 35 3-pointers if the defenders are standing at the 3-point line guarding you. Now, I understand analytics. I know that 3 is more than 2 with my Kentucky education. I also know that 2 is more than 0. And so you make a great point, Jack. At what point do you say, well, we're not going to shoot all these 3-pointers. We're going to try to get to the basket and make some. I played in the highest scoring NBA game in history. It was here in Denver. We played the Detroit Pistons. It went to triple overtime, and the score was like 182 to 180. Do you know how many 3-point shots were taken and made in that game? Each team took 2 3-point shots. Wow. And each team made 1 3-point shot. And it's the highest game in NBA. So I love the 3-pointer. If you can shoot 35%, God bless you. But, if you're shooting 18% like Louisville did the last game, maybe it's time to try something else.
Well, my question then would be, what else can you try with Louisville? Because they built this team to be 3-point shooters. And to be completely honest, they've lost. If you looked at the preseason roster, you thought Corin Johnson would be a guy that would break people down off the dribble. He's out for the year. Case in Pryor, you thought would play kind of a similar role to what Andrew Carr does for Kentucky from the forward spot, being able to drive and be aggressive. He's out for the year. Chucky Hepburn can give you that, and he's been phenomenal in Louisville in so many other ways, and I'd argue he's probably been an All-American so far this year, if you're asking me to pick, who the best guards are in the country right now. And he can get there every once in a while, but he's not a guy that you're just going to give the ball to and say, go beat Lamont Butler if he's playing, or a Jackson Robinson or anyone with Kentucky size, and say, we're going to make our entire offense you beating someone off the dribble. Louisville relies so much on their movement and getting open shots, and they still get a lot of open shots from three. They just haven't been making any of them, which is the issue there. So I wonder, whereas Kentucky, I think, has counters, and we've seen them have counters. Part of it is because of the injuries of Louisville. I don't know if they have a choice other than to just hope that guys start hitting threes.
Well, to your point about the 3-point shots and good looks, Noah Waterman has had as good a looks as you can get. I mean, wide open, and he's been missing. So you hope that continues Saturday afternoon with Noah Waterman. And you mentioned the drop, and this is me just being a Kentucky egomaniac, but coaching matters. And he goes from Pope, where he's shooting these high percentages of threes, to Pat Kelsey, and it drops. I'm kidding, of course. But
no, you're not.
but I did, to your point about what does Louisville do to generate offense if those threes aren't falling, which they haven't been. They have been utilizing Terrence Edwards more,
yes.
Going to the basket, doing things in the paint, and you see how his game has blossomed. I mean, it was kind of one of those situations when he transferred from James Madison, correct? When he transferred,
Sun Belt Player of the Year.
Yeah. I mean, he's a great player there, and you're getting these low returns point wise from him earlier in the season. These last 2 games against Duke, he scores 20 plus points. Against UTEP, scored 20 plus points. I think Pat Kelsey, to his credit, is figuring out ways to get him more involved in the offense, going away maybe from what he naturally wants to do with so many bodies being down, but for him to figure out, okay, I got to get somebody else going other than Chucky Hepburn. Let's do this with you, Terrence Edwards, and it's worked out pretty well. Now, Terrence Edwards is going to have some issues in the paint with Kentucky's size, but I think that would be the counterpunch that Pat Kelsey uses against Kentucky and other teams going forward. If that 3-point shot's not going down, let's get Terrence Edwards involved in the paint, driving to the basket, have Chucky Hepburn drive in, suck some defenders in on him, Terrence Edwards open, boom, there you go.
And I agree with that. That's been
just a couple quick points to respond to Street's thing real quick. You've big timed me on radio enough. It's time for me to cut you off once in a while, big boy. So, couple things.
I love it.
First off, to underscore the 3-point shooting thing, Louisville right now on the season, 27% from 3-point range. As Dan mentioned, that's 241st in the country. That's a bottom 25 team in the whole nation in terms of three-point made percentage. But in terms of 3-point attempt rate, which is 3-pointers attempted divided by all the field goals attempted, Louisville is 6th in the country. 53% of all the shots that Louisville takes is from beyond the 3-point line. So you're talking about a bottom 25 3-point shooting team, but a top 10 team in 3-point shooting volume. So if that doesn't correct, you mentioned, Jack, regression to the mean, assuming that all these guys who came in can translate this distance shooting ability to the high major level or to Kelsey's system, to a new environment. If that doesn't click and they continue, as Dan mentioned, 3 is more than 2, but if they're going to keep shooting these shots and they're going to keep and stick to their guns and play that offensive style,
which I think they're going to.
It's just not going to happen for them this season, right? I mean, you need guys to start making shots at some point. Ryan Smith, is it pronounced Ryan?
Rain.
I was so close. Rain Smith's the only guy. That's fine. Is the only guy shooting the 3 ball at an acceptable rate right now. He's at 37% for the season. He's their highest volume shooter, which you like, but nonetheless, if nobody can follow him in that regard, then they're kind of going to be in a tough spot. To what Streble mentioned about Terrence Edwards, Terrence Edwards has come on strong the last 2 games. Duke 21 points, UTEP 22 points, and 2 big things have coincided with those scoring efforts. One is that he went to the bench. Ever since he started coming off the bench for Louisville, his scoring production, his consistency, and he's still playing a lot. He played 30 minutes in both of those games. That's something that maybe you'll look to see if Pat Kelsey continues. Secondly, he's been getting to the foul line at a significant rate in both those 2 games. 6 for 6 from the foul line against Duke, 8 of 10 from the foul line against Texas El Paso, AKA Texas Western, formerly known to Kentucky fans in that regard. So if he can get downhill, if he can maybe get some of Kentucky's bigs into foul trouble, if you get a couple early fouls on an Andrew Carr and Amari Williams. We've seen Brandon Garrison have some moments this season where he's, struggled to keep up with the pace of the game or maybe get into foul trouble himself. That seems like an avenue that could work for Louisville as well. Obviously, I think it seems like all of us agree that the path to victory for Louisville are much less numerous in the available paths, and they're much narrower. But these are some ways, the three-point shooting kind of reverses itself. Louisville gets out to a fast start, maybe, punches Kentucky first and holds on throughout that first half. And getting Edwards to the foul line, getting him some early buckets, I mean, that's got to be the thing that Pat Kelsey is preaching in pregame and in film study, no?
Yeah, I would say the big thing they've really done with Edwards, it's been interesting since the case in prior injury. They've kind of, for a lot of the stuff they would run through prior in the high post and on the elbow and on the slot, they run for Edwards now. And that's been a great way to get him into the offense, because for the first month plus of the season, he's a guy that looked like he was trying to find his role. And he's really thrived in that small ball for attacking the basket, being a lot more aggressive. And I agree with both of you guys to where that's been Louisville's best source of offense other than just begging for three-point shooting. The other thing you've seen the last handful of games is they'll have possessions where they reverse the ball 2-3 times, get the defense moving, then they'll post Javon Hadley up in the short corner. And that's something where if you're a guard and you haven't seen that as much, that can be a little bit of a difficult thing to try to defend as well. And if you send doubles at that, you can kick out, get the defense in rotation, get some more open shots and penetration off of that as well. Those are the two things. My question is with Terrence Edwards, we talked, Streble, you mentioned, how does Edwards handle the size of Carr and Williams and those guys? Can Andrew Carr guard well enough on the perimeter for 30 minutes as well against Terrence Edwards on the other end?
I think he did a pretty damn good job against Cooper Flagg, specifically in that second half against Duke, where, he had to guard him one-on-one isolation multiple times, where Cooper Flagg started off in the perimeter. So I think Andrew Carr can do it. He's proven he can do it. But that's a good point, because Terrence Edwards is very athletic. He is a good basketball player. And, who else? I'll ask everybody. If it's not working with Andrew Carr defending Terrence Edwards, how does Mark Pope counter that? What kind of moves does he make? What kind of adjustments does he make? Who does he put in to take over that role?
Dan, what would you do in that spot?
Well, I think this. I got a chance. I was in Lexington when Andrew and his mom and dad made their last recruiting trip there. Had a chance to talk to him, meet with him. Mark invited me down to the office when they were in town, and I really like this kid. And I think that if you ask him to guard somebody on the perimeter, I think he can do that. I don't know how comfortable he is, but I saw the last game against Colgate. I saw a number of Kentucky players on the perimeter being beaten off the dribble. And so I think that if that would happen against Louisville, I think Mark would definitely make the adjustments as he has done so well in all of these games this year. But Andrew Carr is my favorite player on this team. I think he's been a little reluctant, it looks like to me, to kind of step up and take that role. But I think as the season goes on, you're going to see him become more and more aggressive. And I think by the end of the year, Andrew Carr will be the best player on the team.
Yeah, I mean, you go back and look at the Duke game, he was the one making plays, really initiating offense. He had the pump fake and drive by Cooper Flagg. He was the one that was Flagg's primary defender, as you mentioned, Streble, for most of that second half, and kept Flagg in front of him on that final play just enough to where Ole could come in on the help defense and get the steal there for him as well. I've been wildly impressed with Andrew Carr, and Cam, I'm sure you have the number on it, but I don't even think he shot the ball as well as we saw him shoot at Wake Forest from three, to where I think there's even more out of him offensively you can get from the outside too.
Well, he's certainly not even shooting the volume of threes that I personally expected him to going in season. Just because of that stretch big archetype, and obviously we mentioned that Kentucky's three-point volume has been a bit reduced compared to what we thought based on all the preseason chatter. Obviously, Kobe Brea being on like an insane heater to start the season, and probably for the duration of the season, you don't see much reason for it to slow down, has eaten into that a little bit. But it's funny. Obviously, Andrew Carr probably wasn't the sexiest, the biggest name addition for Kentucky in the transfer portal. But I did a story earlier this summer over on Kentucky.com and Kentucky.com/sports. please read, that focused on Andrew Carr based on Evan Miyakawa, who's a college basketball statistician, runs a great website called evanmaya.com with tons of information and stats on individuals, teams, all that stuff. Andrew Carr graded out combined offensively and defensively as the most valuable player that Kentucky added in the transfer portal. And that's a combination of experience, the fact that he did it at a high major level before for 2 seasons at Wake Forest. He's definitely one of the most mature players on a team full of mature players, is always a welcome presence at media, always has insightful things to say, seems to understand the game at a tremendously high level. And he's also someone, we mentioned him in some of the late game situations. The Duke game obviously comes to mind, that Mark Pope seems to implicitly trust, not only to just be on the floor, but to even be an offensive initiator, to make that big play, to step up in that big moment. And just to pivot back to the defensive discussion real quick, Andrew Carr, I think is, obviously your primary choice to handle a player like that, to beef up on the inside, to maybe have some quick feet to show some defensive versatility. But another player that Mark Pope has really praised recently has been Jackson Robinson for his defensive efforts. I mean, even through the stretch earlier in the season when Jackson Robinson's scoring totals weren't quite high, when he wasn't making a tremendous box score impact offensively on the game, Pope went out of his way numerous times to praise what Jackson Robinson did on the defensive end, said that every time Kentucky does a post-game film study, Jackson Robinson grades out super high in terms of winning defensive plays. And obviously there's only one of him on the court, and positions will get all kind of jumbled if Lamont Butler can't go. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Jackson Robinson as a bit of a break glass in case of emergency guy to really put anywhere on the court if a Louisville player starts getting off to a strong start on Saturday.
Yeah, and I'd also add, you never know if he's going to throw the zone out there, how he's going to change ball coverages, ball screen coverages, all the different things he's been able to do on the defensive end of the floor. On the other end, a couple things that I find interesting, because I think Louisville, the way they can compete in this game, as we've talked about, is the Edwards stuff. Can he keep his little run going? Can Louisville shoot the ball better? All that stuff. But defensively, is Louisville able to generate turnovers and extra possessions, both in terms of turnovers and also rebounding? Because believe it or not, Louisville had been one of the worst rebounding teams in the country for the first month, loses their best 2 rebounders due to injury in Kason Pryor for the season and Abubakar Traore with a broken arm for 4 to 6 weeks. And the last 4 or 5 games, they have been an absolutely great rebounding team. It has been one of the more stunning developments. I mean, they out-rebounded Oklahoma by, I think it was 21 in the battle for Atlantis. Yeah, it was plus 21. They were plus 7 against Ole Miss. They were minus 1 against Duke, who is quite literally the tallest team in the country. They were plus 11 against UTEP, and they haven't allowed over 25% offensive rebounding percentage since the West Virginia game. So they have been a much, much better rebounding team, despite losing the 2 guys that you really thought would be good rebounders. A lot of that, again, has been James got to be able to stay on the floor a little bit more. But to me, a huge key will be, can Louisville generate enough extra possessions to overcome what may be a deficit in terms of just pure shooting percentages in this game?
Well, there have been times that Kentucky, you look at Colgate, for instance, that, I know Kentucky out-rebounded them, but Colgate made some very timely, gritty rebounds against Kentucky. And not only that bothered me, but the straight line drives that Colgate was getting, specifically in the second half where Kentucky was trying to pull away. Yes, I know they won by 11, but they should have won that game by 25, 30 points. But on the defensive end, they were driving to the basket, getting shots up. They were rebounding their missed shots. I remember the one was a kid named Parker Jones, shoots a 3, rebounds his own miss, goes back and then hits a 3. Stuff like that, you're kind of like, we should be killing them on the boards. So yeah, that stat with Louisville's rebounding definitely is surprising. But whatever Pat Kelsey did or said, or maybe these players just did some gut check and said, you know what, we've got to find other ways to rebound using our bodies, getting good position, because we're not going to be as tall and as big as these other teams are. We've got to do it another way. And they've been doing it. Chucky Hepburn's been getting it going in there, getting rebounds. Terrence Edwards stepped it up. I think he had 2 double-doubles in a row. So they're rebounding. They seem to have fixed that issue. And there have been some times this season where I've been a little disappointed with the size of Kentucky, them not just dominating the boards like they should be able to do.
To your point, Jack, I think, sometimes when you lose a rebounder or two, if you have somebody on the court that's expected to rebound, you get as aggressive. And when the coach says, hey, listen, we're without Pryor, we're without Johnson, you got to go get the basketball. And so it looks like to me that's what's happened to Louisville. Instead of being passive and waiting for somebody else to get the rebound, the closest guy to the ball goes and gets it. And that's a good sign.
Well, let's put a spotlight on Javon Hadley for a quick second. Jack, you mentioned how much they post him up in the short corner as just kind of a bit of a change to things that Pat Kelsey has instituted. Javon Hadley is Louisville's best offensive rebounder. He has 27 for the season. He's averaging nearly 3 offensive rebounds per game. And specifically since the Pryor injury, you look at the box score, 13 rebounds, 6 offensive rebounds for Hadley against Oklahoma, 9 against Ole Miss, 8 against Duke, 12 against UTEP. He had 13 earlier this season against Winthrop. So he's a guy who's really stepped up, risen to the occasion, crashing the glass. And Streble, to your point, a bit of an early season storyline for Kentucky in some of the early bye games leading up to the Duke game was a lack of rebounding. Was Mark Pope, that was the nit that he picked with some of those early season wins over Wright State and Bucknell, I believe, was just not crashing the glass with the intensity that he wanted them to. And I listened back to Pat Kelsey's presser after that UTEP game, and man, you want to listen to a guy wax poetic about going out and trying to get loose balls. He's talking about some former, I think, NCAA Division II coach who taught him that you need to instill this mentality in your players that if you don't get that loose ball, if you don't tip it out to someone, you're going to lose the game. And it seems like Javon Hadley in particular is someone who's risen to the challenge for Louisville, given the injuries, and been a big part of why their rebounding has had a resurgence the last few weeks despite these injuries. So I think one of the priorities for Kentucky, especially if we're talking about controlling the glass and making sure that a team, frankly, Louisville is going to need some second chance points, is going to need some second opportunities to win this basketball game. So if I'm Mark Pope and I'm doing the scout, then Javon Hadley is circled with a big, red X as someone that you cannot let get free. You need to hit him, be aggressive, tag him, do whatever you need to do to make sure he's not getting loose balls.
Yeah, and I'd say Louisville's been a good offensive rebounding team all year. They've been top 30 in the country. The issue's been on the defensive glass that they've really shored up. And I think we're going to see this from both teams, as this is something that Coach Lieberman talks about a lot. Louisville takes a lot of threes. Kentucky takes a lot of threes. What do 3-pointers usually mean if you miss them? Longer rebounds. What do defenses usually do when they see a shot go up? They go in. And that could generate more offensive rebounding opportunities, I think, for both teams.
Sure. No, that's a good point. And going back to something you said, Dan, about Pat Kelsey instilling this identity of you've got to go get the tip ball, you've got to get the rebound, and also, when you're not sitting there and waiting for Traore or Casey Pryor to get the rebound, the way that this team has bought in, and this is for both teams, bought into the way their coaches preach how to play the game. Well, not quitting, not giving up, finding ways to win. I got to give credit to both coaches. Both these teams have bought in. Louisville looks to be dead in the water, and they come back and they play Duke tough as nails. They play well in the battle for Atlantis. And then, look, UTEP gave them a hell of a game, but they never quit. They didn't stop. Same thing with Kentucky. They don't quit. They don't stop. They're buying everything that Mark Pope and Pat Kelsey are selling to them. None of this Kenny Payne junk that Louisville fans had to deal with for 2 seasons. They both have these teams playing the way they envision them to play.
Yeah. And let me say this, because we keep mentioning the UTEP and Colgate games. I basically draw anything that happened in either of those games for Louisville and Kentucky as just a gimme, a do-over, whatever you want to call it, just because that is the tape. I mean, that is the ultimate trap game. I don't know what both these coaches were thinking scheduling those 2 games. For Louisville, you have Duke at home, you have Kentucky on the road. You're scheduling UTEP, a top 150 KenPom team that might win their conference in the middle of that. That's insane in terms of the trap. And then Kentucky, I get it, Colgate's 2-9, but they're a program that's usually really good and competing for NCAA tournament. But to schedule that between Gonzaga and Louisville, guys, you're trying to trip your teams up here.
I will say, I think the rationale behind it, given that both teams have a week off following, Louisville has a week off before they play Florida State in conference play. Kentucky has a week off after Louisville before they play Ohio State in the CBS Classic. College students, they got finals next week. You can't play a game during finals.
Louisville had a 10-day break between the Tennessee game and the Bellarmine game. You could have easily put that UTEP game there instead. And had a full week to prepare for Kentucky.
I'm just making sure the education's taken into account, man. I got to
in the words of John Calipari, they're majoring in basketball.
That's right.
Hey, Doug Moe, my great coach with the Nuggets, told me one time at Kentucky, you drive across campus with your window down and they throw the diploma in the back.
Or like DeMarcus Cousins said when they played, was it Cornell in the tournament? John
in the Sweet 16.
Yeah, in the Sweet 16, he's like, this ain't a spelling contest. Always there for a great soundbite, DeMarcus Cousins.
Jack, we were texting a bit about Boogie Cousins earlier this week about the 2010 game, the early elbow to Shropshire. You're still about that.
So that's from the pure, like, me growing up in Louisville and following that. Yeah, Boogie Cousins was at the top of the hit list for a long time for young Jack Grossman because of that game.
I watched that game with a bunch of Louisville fans at a buddy's house. And when Boogie elbowed Shropshire his face into the court and he didn't get anything, like no throw out, nothing happened to him, I had a friend of mine just get up and leave the house. Like, he couldn't even watch the game with me. He was so mad. He was like, you're cheering for that guy. You're cheering for this team, that dirty Calipari. I can't do this. I can't do this. And he just left and drove off. And after they went to the Cheesecake Factory, I believe, and saw Charlie Strong, which was great.
What an incredible day you had that Saturday.
Oh, it was a wonderful day. I took a picture of Charlie Strong. My wife probably has it in her phone somewhere.
Did you give Charlie Strong an L's down in the photo?
This was pre-L's down. This was pre-L's down, so it had not been invented yet.
Well, I was going to ask, while we're on the subject, Jack, not to completely hijack podcast hosting.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
I didn't mean that seriously. I was going to do it anyway. But something that's really struck me in the build-up to this year's game is, obviously it was really weird with John Calipari and Kenny Payne, both from the former, two UK coaches now on different sides of it, and just the weird vibes of the teams, Louisville being non-competitive, all that stuff. I'm just curious what all you guys think about the tenor between the coaches entering this week's game. You have Pat Kelsey saying that if he had a Coach of the Year ballot right now, he'd write Mark Pope's name on it. You have Mark Pope, praising the job that Pat Kelsey's done. They had a speaking engagement, I believe, in either August or September in Louisville that seemed to be pretty, friendly, chummy between the two. I think Pat Kelsey said, some pretty effusive things, praising Mark Pope's leadership styles, things he even said publicly he would borrow and implement in his own programs. This is a far cry from, obviously, we were joking about that 2010 game with Pitino coming back to Rupp and Calipari. But I'm just curious what you guys think about, obviously, the coaches in this heated rivalry where the fan bases hate each other so much, being relatively friendly and seeming to be on perfectly good, if not even better terms, just given the programs and the prominence of this rivalry.
Yeah, I would say that Coach Kelsey has heard about the rivalry. I'm sure people have told him how important this game is, but he hasn't lost to Kentucky yet. Give him 2 or 3 years. Kentucky has dominated this series. I think the last time Louisville won in Rupp was 2008. Yep. So they're all nice and right now, but wait till one of them loses 2 or 3 games in a row, and see how the fan base reacts to that, and then see how lovey-dovey they are to each other.
Well, to piggyback off of that, that's what Dan just said and what Cam brought up. Both of the coaches did a good job today in their respective press conferences, giving each other the proper amount of adulation and a little smooching besides. Mark Pope tells the story of, God rest his soul, Bill Kitely, Mr. Wildcat, after one of the Louisville, Kentucky games, sitting in the shower crying, after one of those games. And Mark Pope gets this rivalry. He played in it. He understands it. And as to Dan's point, Pat Kelsey may understand it eventually, but until you play in that game, until you have 22,000 fans in Rupp Arena booing you and throwing L's down, it just doesn't hit. the way it should until you're in that situation. Pope's been in that situation. He knows what it's about. He knows what this means to the Commonwealth of Kentucky. He knows what it means to Kentucky fans, and the fact that Louisville's never won more than 2 games in a row in this game. He gets that, and he's going to have that team, I believe, ready to go, and he's going to want to beat Pat Kelsey by 50 points if he can.
Let me ask you guys this, because I agree with all that. Like, Mark Pope understands it. We don't know if Pat Kelsey, just because he hasn't played it or coached in it yet, we don't know about that. But something that Mark Lieberman brought up when we were recording a couple days ago was he talked about how much, there's a few people that understand the rivalry better than anyone, than Rick Pitino, but he talked about openly admit something that has been debated for a long time in the city of Louisville. Was Louisville too tight in those games? And he talked about that they were indeed too tight, that Pitino did not handle that game well at all. For as great as he was as a coach, he had them wound too tightly in that game. Talk about how much they hated Louisville, Kentucky week because of how Pitino would get. With the ambivalence, the fact that Pat Kelsey hasn't been a part of it, the fact that none of the Louisville players have played in it, the fact they could just kind of come in and be a lot looser and just come in guns a-blazing, feeling like they have nothing to lose. They haven't been the team that's lost, 13 of the last 16 times they played. They have no connection to the Kenny Payne stuff with it. Could that be an advantage for Louisville, actually, in this game?
Well, I think that to debate that point, Jack, none of the Kentucky players have played in this either. And so I think the fact that they're going to have 22,000 people cheering for them as soon as the ball goes up, probably an hour before the game even starts. I don't think so. I mean, the hype and the pregame talk and all that stuff. Who was it? Mike Tyson says everybody has a plan until you get hit in the mouth.
Yeah.
And I think as soon as that ball goes up, it's going to be Kentucky against Louisville, their players against Kentucky's players. And I don't think that'll be a factor.
I think you're right too, and you can say play loose and we've got nothing to lose all you want. That's all fine and dandy when you're on the practice floor, but when you get in that situation and the lights are on, you're on ESPN, you have all the fans in that place against you, then it's a little more difficult to just be like, oh, well, it's okay. I'm just going to play loose and free and have fun, just like I did back when I was in 7th grade. It's going to be fine. No, there'll be some tightening up, probably some sloppy play between both teams until they settle down. I guarantee there'll be some nerves with both squads, but which team responds first to get to the challenge, be up to the challenge. And it's going to be a lot easier when you have that home crowd cheering every single thing that you do. So, yeah, you can say loose and free till the cows go home. They won't be very loose and free when they're in that boilerplate on Saturday afternoon.
I will also add, I do think, I said loose and free and all that stuff, but I do think there's more pressure on Louisville in this game. Not just because of the rivalry aspect, but looking at the bigger picture of the season. Louisville needs quad 1 wins to make the NCAA tournament, and they don't have a lot of opportunities left, and they're not going to have a bigger opportunity to get a signature win like going into Rupp Arena, and what that win would mean just from their tournament resume and chances to make the big dance. This is their last really marquee chance for the rest of the season, which is wild to say on December 14th, but they don't get Duke again. Carolina's down.
Yeah.
Pitt is high in the net, but they got blown out by Mississippi State. Clemson's good, but you only get them once, and that's at home on January 11th. Louisville only has 5 quad 1 opportunities the rest of the year. 3 of them are in the next month, and they're not going to get another chance to make a type of statement that they could make against Kentucky on Saturday.
Jack, you're telling me the ACC isn't filled with quad 1 victory opportunities?
It's exactly what I'm telling you.
What we saw earlier this month, I'm stunned, I tell you.
Well, to continue on with all this, I listened to my guy Ethan Moore on the Louisville.
Is he watching the game this year?
Oh, hell no. He's not even doing the post-game show. Taylor Lynch is doing it. My man's going to be walking his dog in the forest.
Honestly, the fact that Taylor's doing the post-game show might be as bad of an omen for Louisville and as good as an omen for
Yeah.
Kentucky. I love Taylor. He's my guy. He's great. But I don't know if he's ever done a post-game show where something good has happened for Louisville, to be completely honest.
You're exactly right. While Ethan's playing fetch with Fido, poor Taylor's going to have to take the brunt of it. But he said something like, they lose to Duke, yada yada yada. They're going to have all these wins to stack up potentially in the ACC, and then I say to myself, so what? Like they're going to be quad 3 wins. They're not going to be marquee wins. They're not going to be wins against teams that Kentucky will face in the SEC. That you made a great point, Jack. This is Louisville's last chance to get a marquee win. Kentucky still has to play Tennessee, Alabama, Ole Miss. I mean, just run the gauntlet. Florida, hell, they're a top 10 team. Run the gauntlet in the SEC. While the win for Kentucky would be another night's notch on their belt, they're going to have bigger fish to fry down the road when it comes to SEC play. Louisville's just not going to have those opportunities. They're not going to have those chances to show the committee that they belong in the field of 68 for now. We'll see what happens when they expand the tournament. Blech, gag. But yeah, I mean, Louisville does need this game. There's going to be a lot of pressure because who gives a damn if they beat Virginia Tech on a Tuesday night in February?
Well, let's also not forget what Louisville has done against SEC teams so far this season. And by that, I mean no-show. Second game of the season, complete no-show at home against Tennessee. Obviously, things were a bit different roster-wise. December 3rd was the first game without Pryor. Still, a no-show at home against Ole Miss. Obviously, Duke, the other real upper-crust team that they played this season. Competitive first half, but Jack, as you alluded to earlier, squandered a ton of opportunities to not be ahead by more at the break. And they simply just don't have the horses to finish the job if this is going, the distance in a big physical battle. So something that I'll be curious to watch as well. And obviously, as Mark Pope did a good job, enunciating at his press conference today, this is a rivalry game. You throw records out, you throw vibes out, it's a completely self-contained thing. That being said, we have evidence of Louisville not showing up against the SEC this season, not showing up at home, given, in big time matchups. So if they're not ready, and especially given the way that this Kentucky team can shoot from 3, the fast paced, frenetic offensive style, if Louisville doesn't answer this opening bell, like we all think is kind of paramount to their chances of winning the game, this could get out of hand quick. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be 17-0 for the Cats like it was against Colgate, and that didn't even prove to matter anything since Colgate came back and took the lead later on. But, you could see this being a bit of a decided advantage for Kentucky early on if Louisville just gets blitzed early, looks dazed. And as we kind of mentioned here a few minutes ago, just the guys not playing in the rivalry, not being, up to par, up to speed right from the moment that ball is tipped.
Also, this is Louisville's. One quick thing. This is Louisville's first true road game of the season. They've only been at home and neutral court in the Bahamas. First true road game is going to be at Rupp Arena. Sorry,
that's exactly what I was about to say. No worries there, Streble. How Louisville handles the road environment, with that being a lot of veteran guys and a lot of guys, you think of Chucky Hepburn, who has played in the Mackey Arenas, the Assembly Halls, the Breslin Centers in the Big Ten, has, Noah Waterman has played in Fog Allen Fieldhouse and the Big 12. They haven't played in a Louisville, Kentucky game, though, and that is going to be different for sure. Dan, how do you handle that going into a raucous environment like that?
Well, I think that you said something at the very beginning, and that is they have to come out. That now they're never going to take the Kentucky fans completely out of the game, but they've got to come out with a quick start and prove that they can play with Kentucky. And if they're not able to do that, then I think I agree with Cam. I think this game gets out of hand real quick.
I'm with you. I'll piggyback off that. During your playing career, what's the toughest environment you had to play in?
As a collegiate, Tennessee. This was before you got to take the bus under the arena, and nobody got a chance to see you until you came out for warm-ups. We got out of the bus and had to walk through a crowd of Tennessee fans into the arena, and they threw oranges at us. So it was Tennessee was definitely the toughest.
What about as a pro? I'm curious.
What?
As a professional player, what was the toughest environment?
that was tough. But Madison Square Garden was pretty tough. Those are very knowledgeable fans, very involved fans. So that was tough. Milwaukee was always tough too for some reason. If you, as I said, if you came out and played well and took the fans out of the game, none of them were too bad.
I'll pivot this on this angle also. As a coach, what would you be telling a team going into an environment like that?
It's you have to, as I think James said earlier, you have to tell them that tell them what they're going to see. I mean, don't let them be shocked when they walk out on the court. Let them know exactly what the environment is, and that and it's hard sometimes. Coach Rupp told me one time, when you get booed on the road, said, take that as a compliment because you're doing something to get their attention. So when you get at home, that's when you better start worrying. So I think Coach Kelsey has to prepare this team for exactly what they're going to face when they take the court in Rupp Arena.
Yeah, I will say the one dude that's a part of the Louisville program that could probably do that better than anyone is Peyton Siva. A guy that played 4 times in the Kentucky-Louisville game, who was on the roster during that DeMarcus Cousins Jared Swampshire game, played in the Final Four game. He would probably be a guy that understands it better than anyone. And if I'm Pat Kelsey, I'm tasking him as man number one of like, okay, get the roster prepared for what you're going to expect inside Rupp Arena on Saturday.
Exactly.
I want to ask you guys this. You brought up with Tennessee. I had a conversation with a friend at work. I've been kind of what's the right way of putting it? The liaison into the funniness of Louisville, Kentucky, and Indiana, just all the stuff that happens around there, just introducing people that are very foreign to it to say, look at all the stupid in a fun way stuff that happens in the state with it. And he brought up that he kind of thought that Tennessee was Kentucky's bigger rival than Louisville, based off of someone that he knew a guy that lived in like Southern Kentucky. So that's basically how he based that off of. But
it certainly was when I played, Jack, because we didn't play Louisville. And so that I don't know. I think now, if you ask most Kentucky fans, I think they'd rather beat Louisville than Tennessee. Maybe not this year, since Tennessee's number 1 in the country right now. But there was a time when it wasn't even close, that Tennessee was Kentucky's biggest rivalry, and probably second was Notre Dame.
I think a lot of it too is you talked about people living in Southern Kentucky. A lot of it is geographically dependent. Like where are you from in the state? Those folks in Eastern Kentucky and down there by the border in Tennessee, they're not paying as much attention to what's going on in Jefferson County and Louisville. I think that Jefferson County is very unique in a sense where Kentucky fans see it and live with it every day. This used to be a point that Andy Sweeney would make. The rest of the state might not have that same vitriol because they don't work with Louisville fans. They're not family members with Louisville fans, whereas Tennessee might be a little closer. It's an older rivalry. They might run into more Tennessee fans, in fact, than they would Louisville fans. So I think I'm not shocked that your coworker thought that it would be Tennessee, Kentucky's biggest rival, and not Louisville. I think that's a good point.
I would add this as well. I've always felt like there's 2 separate dynamics with the Louisville Kentucky rivalry. There's the in the city, where it's the apex of it all, and then there's the out in the state, where it's kind of the not that Louisville's the biggest city in the world, but it's the out in the state versus the in the city dynamic that lives and breathes very much as well. But I think the biggest thing, more than anything, is that Louisville hasn't been very good the last few years. I think that's the big point, is that with Kenny Payne, it diffused a lot. Because even though Kentucky would normally win during the Pitino era, you would still have the hatred of the Pitino Cal stuff, and you would still have the fact that Louisville was making second weekends every year and competing for Final Fours and national titles and conference championships, to where they were still both really, really good top tier programs. for Louisville, I know Ethan Moore always used to say this. I think it has more credence now than it used to. Louisville has to bring up their end of the bargain, but not just in the game, but more so. And I think Pat Kelsey started to do this of trying to bring Louisville basketball back to national relevance.
Yeah, Jack, that's I was
go
gonna say, let's not pretend that winning, like the ebbs and flows of a team winning a rivalry game doesn't matter in this, right? And it's funny, me and Jack were having a conversation with a mutual friend of ours earlier today who is a diehard Louisville fan. I think we can technically call him a Louisville booster because he donates a minute amount of money to the athletic fund there, season football tickets, all that stuff. But he actually compared the juice, the I guess excitement, the pomp and circumstance entering this week's game to something out of the Scott Satterfield Louisville football era. When the Cardinals lost, was it 5 straight Governor's Cup games to Kentucky here? Right. And so, I mean, obviously, I think everyone universally thinks that Louisville should give a better account of themselves on Saturday than they have in the past 2 years. I mean, if they play worse on Saturday than they did in either of the Kenny Payne years, then something has gone horribly, tremendously wrong. But to Jack's point as well, what's the old adage? It's only a rivalry if both teams win, or, it's only a rivalry if everyone's winning occasionally. And obviously Louisville didn't win, or Louisville last won in the COVID impacted season. So it's not too far in the distant past, but it's been something that's been dominated by Kentucky for a long time. Louisville basketball had the absolute life sucked out of it for 2 years. You have 2 coaches who, for now at least, are being extremely cordial and courteous to one another in the media. So unless Louisville is able to really land a punch or even win this basketball game, I think this could be a case where, the reason why Tennessee can be perceived by plenty of people, socioeconomics and demographics aside, as Kentucky's biggest rival is because these 2 teams have been battling it out near the top of the SEC for recent years. Obviously, Tennessee's won a lot of those battles, but nonetheless, even this year, I mean, I'm looking forward greatly to watching both of those Tennessee-Kentucky games, probably individually far more from a basketball purely perspective than I am watching what's going to happen on Saturday.
Yeah, I would say the one thing is you're not having Kentucky and Tennessee fans beat each other out with dialysis.
I knew you were going to bring that up. I knew you were going to bring up the dialysis.
Like Louisville is Kentucky's biggest rival, and I think some Kentucky fans still like to play the old traditional adage of not trying to recognize that Louisville's a thing, which is a lot easier to do when you're 12-52 under Kenny Payne for a couple of years. Yeah. But I think, because again, like Louisville didn't win a lot during the Pitino-Cal era, but you still had so much friction there every single day throughout it, to where I think it's more complex than just, Louisville has to win. Yes, they do. And I think that's more important now, but there's just so many other dynamics with it in there. Maybe if both Pryor and Kirk Kriisa were healthy and got into a fight during the game, that would. So, but it just feels like, and you guys are most, especially Cam and Streble being in Louisville and Lexington, you guys are much closer to it than Dan and I are. It just feels like, as kids, there's not as much juice as we normally see going into the game this year. And I think that's just a compilation of what we've seen the last couple of years with the Kenny Payne era.
It kind of feels like that needs a spark, whether that's Louisville winning the game or, again, a tight, competitive, perhaps overtime game. If we get, anything similar to the Kentucky-Georgia State skirmish from earlier this year, where there's some technicals handed out and Mark Pope and Pat Kelsey are sprinting out onto the floor. I mean, goodness.
Or like after the TBT game this summer.
Oh, certainly.
Oh yeah.
I forgot about how crazy. I was on a train during that. I can't believe that happened. That was insane. But yeah, just even something like a Pat Kelsey, Mark Pope blow-by handshake, anything that can be Zapruder filmed. Like, it does feel like this rivalry, if it's not going to happen in pure basketball terms, just needs a little kindling, right? Just a little spark of something to get everyone fully back re-engaged. I think a lot of people thought we were going to get that over the summer, but, shockingly, Louisville hasn't quite kept up its end of the bargain of that so far this season.
I think what'll happen is when Pat Kelsey, and I have no doubt that this is going to happen, is when he builds a team in Louisville that can come down and be really competitive year in and year out. I don't think that's going to happen in this game, but I'm confident that Coach Kelsey will be able to build that kind of program. Then that is when both teams are really good. When both teams are ranked in the top 25, that's when this rivalry will really heat up again.
Yeah, because
I was going to say, doing sports talk radio in Louisville this week, and it's been, Battle of the Bluegrass week. So, I expected a lot of vitriolic texts sent my way, and there's been a little back and forth on Twitter, but you all are right. There hasn't been a lot of juice, and the smack talk that I have come across seems very manufactured. Like it's just the thing that they need to do because they're Louisville fans and they want to beat Kentucky. Like it's not.
You know, Chucky Hepburn just got whistled for his first foul already.
Yeah, I see exactly. He's still on the bus and he has 2 fouls. Yeah, I've seen some of that, but I don't know. They're just the gravitas that this rivalry normally has. It's missing, and I'm not blaming Louisville. I'm not blaming Louisville fans for it. They've been through hell. They were down there in the 7th layer of hell with Dante in the Inferno, and it just I don't blame them, but they don't feel it, because they haven't seen it for such a long time. And until they see it, they're just not going to buy in. They're very guarded with the hope that they have to win this game, because if they put themselves out there and they say, oh yeah, we're going to go to Rupp Arena, we're going to bust their butt by 12 points, and Pat Kelsey's going to own this rivalry and da-da-da-da-da. But deep down, they know that's a steep hill to climb, and they have so many specific things that need to go their way for that to happen. And the odds of that are, rather low when you look at the entire thing analytically and depth-wise. It's just going to be tough for them to do. So Louisville fans have kind of been like, yeah, PK, go get them. And that's really about it.
Streble, you bent all the way down to pat them on the head on that. That was really well done by you.
Thank you. It's tough when you're 42 and you have bad knees because of playing football for your entire life. But I can do it every once in a while. For Louisville fans, I'll make the exception. You're welcome.
The Bluegrass week, you can go all the way down.
Let's do this, because I've kept you guys for an hour and a half here. This has been fantastic. I loved every minute.
Doesn't feel like it. Yeah,
I know. It's been great.
Yeah.
But I want to ask one more thing on the game itself. Then we'll get some picks and we'll get out of here. Dan, you got something to say. You want to add something before we get to this?
No. Go ahead.
Perfect. I'll throw to you first here, though. So defensively, I worry about Rain Smith in this game. I worry about him defensively in a lot of games, to be completely honest. You saw Duke and UTEP really pick him and kind of go right at him with a lot of straight line drives and really attack him. And Louisville struggled defending that. Rain Smith struggled one-on-one staying in front of guys. While UK isn't going to run a lot of just, hey, Jackson Robinson, go beat this guy one-on-one, he's also struggled off ball. Tennessee ran floppy action after floppy action after floppy action after him got wide open shots all day galore or earlier this season. You've seen him struggle defending on and off ball. And I wonder, because Louisville will switch stuff, but whether or not he's guarding Jackson Robinson, Owe, Kobe Brea, whoever it might be, that's a guy that can exploit that matchup. So how does Kentucky try to attack that? And what are some things that Louisville can do to try to mask that without overhelping too much and giving up wide open threes because you're so worried about that? Dan, you want to start with that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said James.
No. You're all good.
If you've got a guy that can't guard somebody, there's 2 ways to hide him. Number one is to play some zone. I don't know that much about Coach Kelsey's philosophy if he would go to a zone to hide.
He hasn't to this point this year.
But the other way is you've got to give him help. And if they kick it out to an open guy, I'd rather give a team that's shooting 18% from the 3-point line. I'd rather give them an open 3-point shot than have the guy beat me and get to the basket for an easy deuce. So they're going to have to do one of those 2 things.
Cam Drummond, you guys got anything on that either? Just how Kentucky tries to attack Rain Smith on the offensive end?
I mean, the thing is, and to Dan's point, it's going to be tough for Pat Kelsey to hide Rain Smith, I think, because Kentucky can be, they're not always, but they can be so lethal from 3. So if you're bringing somebody to help Rain Smith on Otega Owe or Jackson Robinson or Kobe Brea, whomever that may be, one of those other guys is going to be open at 3, and you better not leave Kobe Brea open for a 3-point shot, because percentages has shown that he can be a deadly weapon out there. Otega Owe can knock him down. Obviously, Jackson Robinson can knock him down. He had that one game earlier in the year where he hit, 5 threes? And then Andrew Carr could even float out there and hit some 3-point shots as well. So that's a tough task for Pat Kelsey. So, what do? Do you allow the twos, or do you take a chance, help over, give Rain Smith a little bit of support, and then you leave one of Kentucky's sharpshooters open? I'm glad I'm not making that decision.
Yeah.
And there's no one else to put out there. You have to leave Rain Smith on the floor, because if you want to beat Kentucky, you have to hit threes, and he's one of Louisville's best 3-point shooters. Even if his numbers have dipped some, the dude can still stroke it from 3.
And I'd also add, as far as Louisville defensively, they haven't played zone so far this year.
They haven't.
I don't know if that's even a good idea for Louisville, because we've talked so much about can they sustain 40 minutes and all that stuff. But when Louisville's at their best on the defensive end, it's when they're really picking up either in the full court or really right when you cross half court, pressuring the heck out of the ball, playing a really staunch man-to-man, making it hard for you to get into your offense. And if you play a zone, unless you're playing that Rick Pitino 2-3 trapping zone, which I don't think Pat Kelsey has in the repertoire, because almost no one has that in the repertoire, you're relaxing. You're letting teams be comfortable. And that's where Kentucky, a more athletic team, can take advantage even more of Louisville. So I don't really think zone's too much of an option for U of L at this point. Of course, maybe they throw it out there as a curveball and it works. You never know. But I really think their best game plan, and really their only plan in this game, as we talked about, they got to get out early, make some shots, put some pressure on Kentucky, put some game pressure on Kentucky, and hope they're able to build up enough of a lead to where they can hold up late.
Yeah, let's also not forget about Kentucky's cutting ability, right? I mean, they do all the stuff from the 3-point line in terms of volume and making shots. And, there's not really a good option in terms of isolating Smith on somebody, because you're probably going to always have that fear that whomever he's guarding is someone who's capable of making the 3-point shot. I mean, unless he ever finds himself guarding Amari Williams or Brandon Garrison.
At that point, you just back him up in the post.
Yeah, and exactly. He's already under the basket and 2 points have already been scored, right? But also just the off-ball cutting movement from Kentucky, especially if there's not a Lamont Butler out there or Kirk Creaser, who was Kentucky's leading assist man. He may actually still be Kentucky's leading assist man despite not playing against Colgate. But just not having, even if you don't have those primary ball distributors, you still have guys who are more than competent at passing the ball. Jackson Robinson at the point guard spot, but also those cuts, taking advantage of your athleticism against a player like Smith will just make it easier for whether it's Robinson, Owe, Colin Chandler, and even on the 3-point thing, even if Kentucky trots out Trent Noah there for a couple minutes, he's shown the capability to make some 3-pointers this season. So it really seems like Louisville's stuck between a rock and a hard place defensively. And honestly, their best idea or their best concept might just be to hope that Kentucky has another poor shooting night from 3-point range. I mean, we've seen 5 straight games of Kentucky taking a lot of threes, not making them to a satisfactory amount. You may just have to live and die with that fact.
Yeah, I would say I think the off-ball stuff worries me a lot more for Louisville against Kentucky than just, they're not going to have a guy like Sion James, for instance, for Duke. I'm not even going to use Cooper Flagg in that instance, but you can just go say, hey, Rain Smith's guarding you. Go beat him one-on-one. Kentucky's not going to do a lot of that, but if Rain Smith's guarding Kobe Brea, they're going to run him off a million screens and really make life hell for him. And I don't know how Louisville can defend that, to be completely honest, other than, as Cam said, just hoping that Kentucky's missing shots. So
I'm not sure who the broadcast crew is for tomorrow's game.
It's Bellis and Schulman.
Oh, guys, if it was Jimmy Dykes, I think he would use NASCAR's cut about $1 billion.
Can Jimmy? I thought about this the other night. Can Jimmy Dykes use the Jimmy's Jet reference for the SEC anymore after the Auburn stuff this year?
Worked for them, though. It worked for them. It should be an endearment.
It did, yeah. They played. They went down there, beat Houston, and I mean, look at them. Outside of losing at Duke, which you can't blame too many people for doing, they've had a hell of a basketball season, as good as anybody.
I think they're the best team in the country right now. I
wouldn't disagree. Yeah.
I know Tennessee's number 1, but they haven't played the schedule Auburn has, and I honestly think they might lose at Illinois on Saturday as well, because that's going to be – I know they played at Louisville, but the way that game went where they had the 10-0 lead early, they took the crowd out of it. to where that wasn't the Louisville crowd's fault. It was a sellout crowd. Just Tennessee did the way they started that game, just took it, made it a non-factor to where this is really their first true road test in an environment that I think will stay charged up, not just be charged up pregame.
You also watched Tennessee lose a home exhibition to Indiana, so I think maybe that's skewing your perspective of
how Indiana beat that Tennessee team, which Indiana, we're recording this on Friday night. Indiana's losing to bum-ass Nebraska right now with 9 minutes left.
What's the score?
They're only down 2, which is honestly better than I thought they were going to be doing. But
they came back. Yeah, Woody resurrected.
So if you want to know how much the Louisville game, like, Louisville needs Indiana to be good and that to be a quad 1 win. They need West Virginia to be good as well because Tucker DeVries getting hurt does not help that cause. No. I thought before that injury that West Virginia had a really good chance of holding up as a quad 1 win. I don't know if it will now. IU, obviously, they need that. Louisville beating UTEP by 3 points caused Indiana to drop 5 spots in the net.
Oh.
That's how much of an impact
not in Paco, no.
That 28-point game has on Indiana.
5 spots.
That's, 5 spots.
That's unreal, man. That's unreal.
Which I know, I think Sam Hoiberg just tackled someone. That's enough play-by-play on this game. That'll be over by the time anyone listens to this. I know, Dan, you could not care anything about the net or the ping pong ratings or any of that stuff.
Ping pong.
No, I prefer to see what happens on the floor. That's what I like to see.
Yeah. So I have a good idea of what everyone's going to say, but going to ask it anyways. What do we see on the floor, Louisville, Kentucky on Saturday?
You want me to go first?
Go for it.
Cats by 24.
Whoa, I like it. Look at that, Dan Issel. That's what I'm talking about. That's a real Wildcat right there, baby. Let's go. I've got Kentucky 89-75. 89-75. I think Louisville comes out, they hit some shots early. Maybe even Louisville has a 1-2 point lead at the half, and then down the stretch, Kentucky just does what they do and just overwhelms them, outthinks them. Kentucky wins the game 89-75.
On the strength of finally predicting the Governor's Cup game for the first time correctly at the 4th time of asking, and after, it did not take a genius to pick the result of this game the last 2 years, shall we say. I'll go Kentucky 92, Louisville 79. I think relatively comfortable for the Cats. I think we're going to get a really competitive first half. I really do. I think Louisville will land some haymakers early on and, maybe a bit of a cagey game to start. We talked earlier about how nobody's been in this rivalry before, whether from the head coaching perspective in terms of Mark Pope's never coached in this game, Kelsey's never coached in this game, none of the players have been involved. So, aside from the Aiden McCools and the Walker Horns of the world, guys who will factor in. But I think Kentucky will ease away early in the second half. And again, a battle of attrition. Kentucky's got the depth. Kentucky has the horses for this race. And through really no fault of his own, Pat Kelsey just doesn't really have the firepower to keep up. We should think, at least. I know weird things happen in this game, but it sounds like we're all going for a pretty comfortable Kentucky victory.
I think it'll be a little bit closer than that. Not too much, but I think, Cam, you spilled out kind of the narrative of what I think this game takes too. I think we kind of have a script of the Louisville Duke game to where I think it's going to go pretty similar to that. Louisville's going to come out. They're going to play with high energy, intensity, all that stuff, land a big punch. But throughout the game, Kentucky's just going to be able to battle and stay in it enough to where they're going to be able to wear Louisville down and win at the end. I'll go 84-76. Kentucky ends up winning. So very fun stuff. Dan, I know you're getting a little restless there. Looks like you got...
No, Mrs. Issel has got supper ready, so that's
oh yeah, let's go.
What's for supper tonight?
Don't get to eat tonight.
What's for supper tonight?
What are we having, honey?
Bacon tomato sandwiches.
Bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches.
Oh, yum! I love a good
fantastic.
BLT. Yeah.
Could never go wrong with a BLT. Well, I won't keep you any longer. I'll let you get to your supper. I'm sorry. I really do appreciate you guys coming on, joining on, having a really fun combo here, talking Louisville and Kentucky. Battle of the Bluegrass coming up later today on Saturday. For Dan Issel, Cam Drummond, and James Streble, I am Jack Grossman. This has been Floyd Treat's Finest. We'll be back probably Sunday or Monday, I think, with Coach Lieberman. I'm actually going to be on the beach doing this.
Whoa.
We'll link up in time. So it won't be anything too quick there. Yeah, no, I'm going to have myself a fun week there for sure. But
Yes, you
guys,
They were in the Bahamas last month, buddy, not this month.
yeah, we're doing this in lieu of the Bahamas. But anyways, thank you guys. Floyd Treat.